आजिमा छेज्यालो फ्योफुल नमस्कार शुभ सन्ध्या नेपालबाट अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तमु परिषदै आयोजना लबा चुतुरुरी नेपाल नेरो औ हिलर सोदन टिबा उ खयौ टिबा तान तमुमै खाखु थसी तिया चु भर्चुअल तुरुरी न्योनी बालो प्रेतबा चु छ्याबा तिरी तानलाई कैसै नोर्सेन तेबमु दै नमकमु प्लिरो सम्मान तबा चु तुरुरबे तिया सोक्लो दिनरबे तुरुरीमो न्यौ अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तमु गुरुङ परिषदले आयोजना गरेको 4 दिवसीय अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तमु गुरुङ संवाद श्रृङ्खला 2020 को आज तेस्रो दिनको कार्यक्रममा यो मिटिङ कक्षमा सहभागी सम्पूर्ण आदरणीय महानुभावहरू र विभिन्न फेसबुक पेज र सञ्चार माध्यमबाट हामीलाई प्रत्यक्ष सुन्नुहुने र हेर्नुहुने सम्पूर्ण आदरणीय दर्शक र श्रोता महानुभावहरूमा हार्दिक नमस्कार तथा हृदयदेखि नै स्वागत गर्छौं। कोरोना कहरले दिखाएको यो विषम परिस्थितिमा पनि सूचना तथा सञ्चार प्रविधिले हामीलाई भौतिक रूपमा एकै ठाउँमा सहभागी हुन असम्भव भए पनि भर्चुअल रूपमा एकै ठाउँमा सहभागी भई एक आपसमा ज्ञान लिने र दिने अवसर जुराएको छ। अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तमु गुरुङ परिषद तथा तमु युल सोजदी गुरुङ राष्ट्रिय परिषदका केन्द्रीय अध्यक्ष श्री रेशम गुरुङज्यू नेपाल लगायत संसारका विभिन्न मुलुकहरूमा स्थायी वा अस्थायी बसोबास गर्ने र तमुको पहिचान भाषा धर्म संस्कार संस्कृति र परम्पराको संरक्षण र सम्वर्धन गर्न प्रयासरत सबै तमु दाजुभाइ तथा दिदीबहिनीहरूलाई नेपालका तमुहरूको तर्फबाट सम्मान व्यक्त गर्दै सम्झन चाहन्छौँ। यो अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तमु भर्चुअल संवादमा नेपाल लगायत संसारका करिब 35 मुलुकका हामी तमुहरू भेला भएका छौँ। यो हाम्रा लागि अत्यन्त गौरव र खुसीको पल हो। नेपाल लगायत संसारका विभिन्न मुलुकहरूमा स्थायी वा अस्थायी बसोबास गर्ने सम्पूर्ण तमुहरू बीचको भावनात्मक एकतालाई विकास गर्दभूत बनाउँदै तमुहरूको आफ्नो आदिम मूल्य मान्यता र सो पहिचान परम्परा रीतिथिति भाषा लिपि साहित्य संस्कार संस्कृति इतिहास आदिको बारेमा एक आपसमा ज्ञान आदान प्रदान गर्दै साझा बुझाइ विकास गर्ने र गराउने यो अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय भर्चुअल संवादको मूल उद्देश्य रहेको छ। हाम्रा पितृहरू ज्ञात अज्ञात तमु शहीदहरूप्रति श्रद्धाञ्जली अर्पण गर्दै तथा हाम्रा तमु अग्रजहरू मार्गदर्शकहरूप्रति सम्मान व्यक्त गर्दै अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तमु संवादको आजको तेस्रो दिनको पहिलो सत्र सुरु गर्न चाहन्छौँ। आजको हाम्रो सेसनको शीर्षक रहेको छ विदेशी विद्वानहरूको नजरमा हामी तमु। यो सेसनलाई औपचारिकता दिन गण्डकी विश्वविद्यालयका कुलपति पूर्व सभासद तथा तमुयुल सोजदी गुरुङ राष्ट्रिय परिषदका पूर्व अध्यक्ष र हाम्रा मार्गनिर्देशक प्राध्यापक डाक्टर गणेश गुरुङज्यूलाई अध्यक्षको आसन ग्रहण गरिदिनु हुन हार्दिक अनुरोध गर्दछु।
नमस्कार sir. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to share the session. मैले अध्यक्षता गरेँ। खाजालो नमस्कार।
धन्यवाद अध्यक्षज्यू र अध्यक्षज्यूको अनुमतिले अब म कार्यक्रमलाई अगाडि बढाउन चाहन्छु। यो सेसनमा हामीसँग 3 जना विदेशी विद्वान वक्ताहरू हुनुहुन्छ जो तमु जाति र समुदायको अत्यन्त नजिक रहेर अध्ययन र अनुसन्धान गर्नु भएको छ र हाम्रो तमु समुदायका अनन्य मित्रहरू हुनुहुन्छ। उहाँहरू हुनुहुन्छ जापानका नानाको योशिमोतो, बेलायतका प्राध्यापक डाक्टर साइमन स्ट्रिकल्यान्ड र प्राध्यापक डाक्टर आलन मैकफार्लन। यसै गरी यो सेसनमा यहाँहरूलाई स्वागत गर्न युनाइटेड गुरुङ सोसाइटी अफ अमेरिकाका उपाध्यक्ष एनबी गुरुङ र धन्यवाद ज्ञापनका लागि कतार तमु सोसाइटीका अध्यक्ष भाइ काजी गुरुङ हुनुहुन्छ। यो सेसनका सम्पूर्ण टिम सदस्यज्यूहरूलाई एकमुष्ट रूपमा आभार व्यक्त गर्दै स्वागत गर्न चाहन्छु र हाम्रा आजका वक्ताहरूको बुझाइका लागि संक्षेपमा अङ्ग्रेजीमा पनि म भन्न चाहन्छु। A very good evening to you all. Australia, Bhutan, Burma, Hong Kong, India, Japan, South Korea. Good afternoon to Europe, Middle East, and good morning to America and Canada from Nepal. We would like to acknowledge and recognize all the Tamumai brothers and sisters around the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, a hearty welcome to you all in this third day of International Tamu Gurung Virtual Dialogue organized by International Tamu Gurung Council. Today we have two sessions. Now we are having the first session, and the theme of the session is the Gurungs in the eyes of foreign scholars. Professor Dr. Ganesh Gurung, the Chancellor of Gandaki University, Nepal, is chairing this session. And we have three foreign scholars as speakers who all have worked and very deeply connected to Tamus and the Tamu society. I am very honored to recite their names. We have Nanako Yoshimoto from Japan, and Professor Simon Strickland and Professor Alan Macfarlane from the United Kingdom. And very great to see you, Nanako Anga, in the Tamu attire, and with the coolies, our Agis. Likewise, Mr. N.B. Gurung, the Vice Chair of United Kingdom Society of America, is delivering the welcome speech, and Mr. Bhai Kaji Gurung, the Chair of Qatar Tamu Society, is delivering vote of thanks. Without further ado, let me switch to Nepali to proceed the session. अब म यहाँहरूलाई प्राविधिक व्यवस्थापन बारे केही जानकारी दिन चाहन्छु। हाम्रो यो कार्यक्रम विभिन्न संघ संस्था तथा मिडियाका फेसबुक पेजबाट पनि प्रत्यक्ष हेर्न र सुन्न सक्नुहुनेछ। यदि कुनै कारणवश तपाई डिस्कनेक्ट हुनु भएमा फेरि सोही लिंकमा क्लिक गर्नुहोला र तपाईलाई हामी पुनः जोड्ने छौं। यस मिटिङ रुम भित्र यहाँहरू अत्यन्त धैर्य, शान्त र अनुशासित भई बसिदिनु हुन पनि हामी विनम्र अनुरोध गर्छौं। तपाईको भिडियो अन गरेर खाने वा अन्यसँग कुराकानी गर्ने, हिडडुल गर्ने वा अन्य काम गर्नु परेमा कृपया आफ्नो भिडियो अफ गरिदिनु हुन पनि हामी अनुरोध गर्दछौं। अब भने म यहाँ सहभागी सबैलाई औपचारिक रूपमा स्वागत गरिदिनु हुन युनाइटेड गुरुङ सोसाइटी अफ अमेरिकाका उपाध्यक्ष एनबी गुरुङज्यूलाई हार्दिक अनुरोध गर्दछु। एनबी गुरुङज्यू।
Thank you, Sister Anita. Good morning from America. I am NB Gurung, President of United Gurung Society of America. Indeed, it is my great pleasure to be a part of this historical program organized by International Tamu Council, ITC. At this juncture, I especially would like to welcome the chairman of the session, the Gurungs in the eyes of foreign scholar, Professor Dr. Ganesh Gurung, Chancellor of Gandaki University, Nepal. The speakers of the session, Ms. Nanako Yoshimoto, PhD scholar, Tokyo Metropolitan University, Japan. Professor Dr. Simon Strickland, Office of the Cabinet, London, UK. Professor Dr. Alan Macfarlane, Cambridge University of UK. And every single Gurung brothers and sisters joining with us from different countries. Finally, I express my heartfelt gratitude to the entire organizing team providing me this opportunity to share this wonderful platform. Welcome you all once again. Thank you all. Chhajalo namaskar. म एनबी प्ले तमु अमेरिकाबाट र युनाइटेड गुरुङ सोसाइटी अफ अमेरिकाको उपाध्यक्षको रूपमा काम गर्छु र आज यस जुम प्रविधि मार्फत अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तमु संवाद श्रृंखला 2020 को तेस्रो दिनको विदेशी विद्वानहरूको नजरमा हामी गुरुङ पत्रमा विभिन्न देश विदेशबाट जोडिनु भएका सम्पूर्ण महानुभावहरूलाई एक मुष्टमा युनाइटेड गुरुङ सोसाइटी अफ अमेरिकाको तर्फबाट र मेरो व्यक्तिगत तर्फबाट यहाँहरू सम्पूर्णलाई न्यानो अभिवादनका साथ स्वागत गर्न चाहन्छु। स्वागतम, सुस्वागतम, सुस्वागतम। धन्यवाद। ग्यास अझै
लेले ओर्से ग्यास अझै धन्यवाद एनबी गुरुङज्यूलाई स्वागत मन्तव्यका लागि। अब म आजका वक्ताहरूको प्रस्तुतिलाई अघि बढाउने क्रममा जापानका नानाको योशिमोतोज्यूलाई प्रस्तुतिका लागि अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु। उहाँलाई फ्लोर दिनुभन्दा अगाडि उहाँको छोटो परिचय दिन अनुमति चाहन्छु र स्लाइड प्रस्तुतिका लागि प्राविधिक टिमका सदस्य रोम गुरुङज्यूलाई अनुरोध गर्दछु। नानाको योशिमोतो सन् 1987 को फेब्रुअरीमा जन्मनुभएका उहाँ जापानको टोकियो मेट्रोपोलिटन विश्वविद्यालयमा मानव शास्त्रमा विद्यावारिधि गर्दै हुनुहुन्छ। उहाँले कास्कीको गुरुङ गाउँ सिक्लेसमा सन् 2014 देखि 16 सम्म आफ्नो शोध कार्य गर्नुभएको थियो। उहाँ सन् 2008 मा पहिलो पटक नेपाल आउनु भएको थियो। उहाँको आफ्नो विद्यावारिधिको शोध पत्रको शीर्षक रहेको छ Social slack as a technique of coexistence and everyday life among तमुमे नेपाल। नेपालका तमुमे बीच सहज जीवन र दैनिक जीवनको विधिको रूपमा सामाजिक समूहहरू भन्ने शीर्षकमा उहाँले आफ्नो शोध कार्य गरिरहनु भएको छ। उहाँले मानव शास्त्रमा नै सन् 2013 मा स्नातकोत्तर र सन् 2010 मा स्नातक पूरा गर्नु भएको छ। सन् 2013 देखि उहाँको पेशागत जीवन रहेको छ। उहाँले सन् 2013 मा मानव शास्त्र सम्बन्धी सम्मेलनमा अनुसन्धान सहायक, सन् 2014 मा अनुसन्धान सदस्य हुँदै अहिले आएर टोकियो स्थित रिकीको विश्वविद्यालयमा आंशिक समयका लागि उपप्राध्यापकको रूपमा पनि काम गर्दै आउनु भएको छ। उहाँको विद्यावारिधि पश्चात उहाँको उत्तरोत्तर प्रगतिको पनि हामी शुभकामना दिन चाहन्छौँ। Now I would like to give the floor to Nanako. Nanako, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. I will indicate the time when 3 minutes is left and finally when 1 minute is left to wrap up your talk. Please, Nanako, now the floor is yours.
Namaste. Nice to see you. Ngami Nanako Yoshimoto ya nga tongo Japanese koimo. I'm Nanako Yoshimoto from Japan. My English is not good, so I like to speak in Gurung language or Nepali language, but today I will try to speak in English. I would like to thank you all for inviting me here today, and it is a great honor to present at this session with the great professors, Dr. Adam Macfarlane and Dr. Simon Strickland. And from now, I use PowerPoint. The theme of this session is the Gurungs in the eye of foreign scholars. The professors, Dr. Ann and Dr. Simon, have been working with Gurungs for many years, so I am sure that they will give us a holistic view of Gurung culture. So I would like to talk a little bit about Gurung's marriage practice, especially based on the result of my research in Kaski and Lamjung. Perhaps it is because I am a woman and a Japanese researcher that I have been able to focus on such marital practices. I went to Nepal in 2014 and studied the Gurung language for a while in Pokhara, and then began my field work in Siklis village for about 3 years. About a month after I began my research in the village, I noticed a phenomenon that I hadn't known before. Several of the women in my neighborhood were married but living in their native homes. Before I started my field work, I had read a lot of previous studies on Gurung, and it said that after marriage, women move in with her husbands. So when I started my field work, I was surprised to learn that married women were living in their native homes. I asked one woman why married women live in their birth homes. She replied, it's just the way it's always been. She went on to say, we live in the birth house until we have 2 or 3 children, and husband comes to his wife at night and returns in the morning. I also came to a marital home after I had my 3rd child. To summarize her story, after marriage, the couple do not live together immediately. that live in their respective birth homes. And in the meantime, the husband visits his wife. In other words, I found out that they live married life in the form of visiting marriage at the beginning of the marriage. This realization prompted me to investigate the practice associated with groom marriage, in which the woman does not move to the marital home but lives in their birthplace for a while after the marriage. There are two reasons for this research project. Firstly, little attention has been paid to such practices in previous studies, although there has been fragmentary references to them. Previous studies have described Bloom's mode of marital residence as partly local residence, namely residence in husband's house. Some previous studies have mentioned that there is a certain period of time after marriage for the wife to move from her birthplace to the marital home. It has been described only in fragments. In other words, in previous studies, little emphasis has been placed on the temporary nature of marital life, in which couples are separated and the husband goes to his wife for a while after marriage. This has to do with second reason why I think this temporary nature of marital life is important. The second reason is that similar marriage practices once existed in Japan and some areas of Asia. Japanese cultural anthropology and folklore studies have accumulated studies on such marriage practices in Japan. To be specific, they have typified temporary visiting marriage as a form of marriage in which the couple lives apart for a period of time at the beginning of the marriage, during which one visits the other, and then the wife moves into the husband's home. And they have tried to understand why such marriage practices exist,
Yeah.
what it brings. I thought I could make use of those studies. First, to understand this marriage practice, we need to understand how to process marriage proceeds among Gurungs. There are two main ways of marriage by arrangement and marriage by elopement. And here, I would like to explain marriage by arrangement. In the case of marriage by arrangement, the marriage begins with a proposal of marriage arrangement called Presho Liba in Gurung language. Then, after the approval of the marriage proposal called Pafulava in Gurung language, the marriage is formalized through the procedure called Purung Yaba. After that, the procedure called groom entering, that called Biala Hoba in Gurung language, is carried out. And with this, the husband goes to his wife at night. Or if the couple are from different villages and the husband cannot visit his wife at night and return in the morning, the husband begins to travel back and forth between his home and his wife's home for days or weeks at a time. After that, the procedure called getting right into, that called Reshozoba in Gurung language, and banquet take place. And finally, the wife moves to her husband's house with a procedure called Kitsuba, and the couple begins living together. husband's visit to her wife begins with groom entering, that is Biala Hova, and continues until couple's cohabitation begins at the Kitsuba. I don't have time to go into the details of each of these legal procedures here, so I'd like to explain only the key points that are important to understand the visiting marriage. The husband begins to visit his wife after the groom entering Piala Hova. Since the marriage has always been consummated, it would seem that the couple could begin living together. However, this is not possible at this point because the wife cannot enter her husband's house without performing the subsequent ceremony of getting bride into, that is Preshozoba in Greenland. In other words, the ritual procedure allows for marital life only in the form of a visit by the husband to his wife's house, from groom entering until getting bride into. At least in the areas I researched, the separation of the couple at the beginning of the marriage and the husband's visit to his wife's house is not a self-indulgent practice, but a legitimate marriage practice that is accompanied by these ritual procedures. In principle, these ritual procedures can be completed in a short period of time, but in most cases, several months or several years can pass from the time the proposal of marriage is made to the time the banquet takes place. Due to practical problems, such as the cost for the banquet and waiting for an appropriate auspicious day to perform the rituals. Therefore, the wife will be continue to live in her birth home for a while. So actually, how long does the wife continue to live in her natal home after the marriage? Is there a socially determined period of time? I, inter- I, in- I interviewed all the households in the village, and while some said they had moved to their marital home immediately, others had lived in their birth home for more than 10 years before moving their husbands. The length of time wives lived in their natal home after marriage varied from person to person, so it was not possible to confirm any kind of standard or tendency. Furthermore, by the survey, it was found that not only the length of time wives moved to their husband, but also the triggers for the move were diverse. For example, labor shortage in the marital home, building a new house, and migrating abroad were cited as triggers for the move. However, for instance, lack of labor in the marital home can be an impetus for the move, while lack of labor in natal home can be a reason to stay in the natal home. At the same time, for example, some people said they left their birthplace because their husband were overseas, while others moved to their husband homes despite their husband being abroad. This means that these triggers for the move to marital home are only dependent on individual circumstances. Even if these could be triggers, they are not requirements for the move. There are no common social requirements for the move, only individual and specific triggers. Rather, in the fact that there are no requirements shows the feature of flexibility of such a marriage practice. So far, I have presented 2 points about the temporary visiting marriage among Gurungs. The first is that the marriage practice with wife visiting is not a self-indulgent practice, but a legitimate marriage practice with ritual procedures. The other, that there are no common social requirements regarding the period or triggers for the wife to move the husband's house. Just only depends on the individual concrete circumstances. In this respect, it is a very flexible marriage practice. Here, I would like to summarize by referring to the studies that has been accumulated in Japan. According to Japanese folklore studies, Japanese marriage customs can be broadly divided into 2 types, Yomei-rikon and Mukoi-rikon. Yomei-rikon is a form of marriage in which the wife moves to her husband's house immediately after marriage, while Mukoi-rikon is a form of marriage in which the husband goes to his wife until she moves to her husband's house, similar to Gurung marriage practice that I have introduced today. Since Mukoi-rikon was practiced in limited areas, there has been much debate in Japanese folklore studies as to why such marriage practice exists. However, none of the explanations have been enough. So it has been suggested that rather than looking at these temporary visiting marriage as a result of some courts, it is better to look at what is being brought about by them to understand the phenomenon better. So, what does the temporary visiting marriage I have described today bring about in Gurung society? For, for one thing, the period between marriage and a wife's move to her husband is a period of moratorium of women. As studies in Japan have pointed out, it is natural for women to be reluctant to move to marital home because they want to stay in their familiar home. After a woman moves to a marital home, she has to build new relationships there. This Gurun's practice of temporary visiting marriage, in which the marriage is completed in stages rather than immediately, to some extent mitigates the hesitancy of women to move to marital home. I understand that the practice of temporary visiting marriage, which I have introduced today, is not common to all Gurungs. Furthermore, in some areas, this marriage practice seems to be disappearing. When I did research at one village in Lamjung, I heard that in that village, the village council had decided that women should move in with their husbands immediately after marriage. In other words, it was forbidden for a woman to stay at her birthplace for a certain period of time after marriage. Culture is shifting in any place, and I have no say in it. However, I would be sad for me if they considered current practice of temporary visiting marriages as shameful in comparison to other ethnic groups in Nepal. If we look outside of Nepal, the practices of temporary visiting marriage also exist in Japan and some areas of Asia. And I believe that each culture should be respected. And as a woman and as a Japanese researcher, I am very happy to come across and thematize Gurung's practice of temporary visiting marriage. Finally, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Paul Bahadur Gurung and his family for accepting me as a member of family and to all the people of Siklis for supporting my research. बाजे पुजुमे अनि मा बामे दाजु बाइमे anju nanjume wala wursume tanande dande badamu all. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. धन्यवाद.
लेले ओर्से ग्यासाजे धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद नानाको योशिमोतो ज्यूलाई. नानाको सान दोमो आरिगातो ओजाइ गोजाइ मासिता. Thank you very much, Nanako, for your wonderful presentation. It is particularly dedicated to Gurung women, as we can understand. You have made us recall those memories who are now in cities, and those children may not necessarily have gone through such experience, but that exist in villages like Siklis. Your passion about us and our culture is highly appreciated. Now, let me switch to Nepali for some minutes to share a summary of your presentation. नानाको आङाले आज हाम्रो सामु गुरुङ समाजमा निहित प्रचलन बारे व्याख्या गर्नु भएको छ र त्यो कुरा जापान लगायत पूर्वी एसियामा पनि भएको बताउनु भएको छ. उहाँले सन् 2014 देखि 16 सम्ममा सिक्लेसमा बसेर शोध कार्य गर्दा उहाँलाई एकदमै अचम्म र चाखलाग्दो विषयको रूपमा हामी गुरुङहरूका चेलीहरू विवाह पश्चात पनि माइतमा नै धेरै वर्षसम्म बसिरहने कुरालाई उहाँले गहिरो गरी बुझ्ने प्रयास गर्नुभयो. उहाँले सुरुमा एकजना महिलालाई सोध्नुभयो र उत्तर पाउनुभयो कि यो विवाह पछि पनि माइतमा नै बस्ने चलन सधैँदेखि चलिआएको हो भनेर उहाँले भन्नुभयो र यो जवाफ पाउनु भएपछि दुई तीन जना सन्तान नभएसम्म श्रीमानको घर जाने चलन छैन भन्ने कुरा पनि उहाँले थाहा पाउनु भयो. तसर्थ उहाँलाई यो विषयमा निकै चाखलाग्दो भएपछि यसमा उहाँले गहिरो अध्ययन सुरु गर्नुभयो. किन भनेर भन्ने क्रममा र उहाँले यस्तो विषय रोज्नुको चाहिँ दुईटा स्पष्ट कारणहरू भनेर भन्नुभयो. पहिलो, अघिल्लो अध्ययनहरूले यसबारे पर्याप्त खोज र उल्लेख नगरेको र दोस्रो, उहाँले यस्तै खाले अभ्यासहरू जापान तथा एसियाका केही देशहरूमा पनि पाइने र तुलनात्मक अध्ययन गर्न सकिने भएको हुनाले उहाँलाई यो विषय उहाँले रोज्नुभयो. साँच्चै नै हो, मानवशास्त्रीहरू तुलनात्मक अध्ययन गर्छन् र आफ्ना विश्लेषणहरू पस्कन्छन् समाजमा. र जापानको सांस्कृतिक मानवशास्त्र कल्चरल एन्थ्रोपोलोजीले पनि यस्ता विवाहहरूका बारेमा प्रशस्तै संकलन गरेको छ र यस्ता विवाहलाई टेम्पोररी भिजिटिङ म्यारेज भनेर वर्गीकृत गरिएको छ, जसमा विवाहपछि केही वर्षका लागि दुलाहा दुलही सँगै बस्दैनन् तर बेला बेलामा छोटो भेटघाट मात्र गर्छन् उनीहरू. गुरुङहरूका बारेमा कुरा गर्दा उहाँले के पाउनु भयो भने जापानमा पनि पाइने प्रचलनमा जस्तै यहाँ विवाह कि त मागी विवाह कि भागी हुने गर्छ र यहाँ उहाँले मागी विवाहको बारेमा सम्पूर्ण व्याख्या गर्नुभयो र जस अनुसार हामीमा प्रेस्योलबा, पौलबा, पुरुनियाबा, ब्यारहोबा, प्रेस्योजोबा, खिचुबा आदि उहाँले स्पष्ट के पाउनु भयो भने विवाह पश्चात दुलाहा दुलही आफ्नो जन्मघरमा केही वर्षसम्म बस्ने भए पनि आउने जाने कुराले वैधानिकता पाउँछ र सन्तानहरू हुन्छन्, जन्मन्छन्. यस्ता कुराहरू जापानसँग पनि तुलना गरेर उहाँले यस्तो चलनलाई भिजिटिङ म्यारेज वा पाहुना विवाह भन्ने नाम दिनुभएको छ, जसका केही सामाजिक राम्रा पक्षहरू र केही नराम्रा पक्षहरू पनि उहाँले औल्याउनु भएको छ. अन्तमा उहाँले यस्तो विवाह प्रथा धेरै गाउँहरूमा रहेको छ तर यो हराउँदै पनि गएको छ. लमजुङका केही गाउँहरूमा चाहिँ विवाहपछि तुरुन्तै दुलाको घर गइहाल्नुपर्छ भन्ने पनि उहाँले जानकारी गराउनु भएको हामीसँग त्यो कुरा पनि सेयर गर्नुभयो. समग्रमा नानाकोबाट आज हामीले हाम्रो हराउँदै गएको एउटा प्रथाको बारेमा हामी मध्ये कतिलाई थाहा भएका र त्यो थाहा भएकालाई पुनः स्मरण गर्ने र थाहा नभएकालाई राम्रो सूचना भयो होला भन्ने हामीले आशा गरेका छौँ. ग्यासजे नानाको. अब म आजका हाम्रा अर्का वक्ता बेलायतका प्राध्यापक साइमन स्ट्रिकल्यान्डज्यूलाई प्रस्तुतिका लागि अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु। उहाँलाई फ्लोर दिनुभन्दा अगाडि उहाँको छोटो परिचयका लागि स्लाइड प्रस्तुतिका लागि म रुम गुरुङज्यूलाई अनुरोध गर्दछु। Now I move on to introducing our second speaker, Professor Simon Strickland from the United Kingdom. प्रोफेसर साइमन स्ट्रिकल्यान्ड बेलायत सरकारको एक निजामती कर्मचारी हुनुहुन्छ। उहाँले सन् 2001 देखि संयुक्त राष्ट्र सङ्घ लगायत संस्थाहरूमा विभिन्न नीति तथा रणनैतिक मामिलाहरूका रूपमा काम गर्नुभएको थियो र सन् 2015 देखि क्याम्ब्रिज स्थित विज्ञान तथा नीति केन्द्रका प्राज्ञको रूपमा पनि कार्यरत हुनुहुन्छ। सन् 1985 देखि 2001 सम्म लन्डन स्कुल अफ हाइजिन एन्ड ट्रपिकल मेडिसिन तथा युनिभर्सिटी कलेज लन्डनको लागि संयुक्त रूपमा मानव शास्त्र तथा पोषण विज्ञान सह प्राध्यापकको रूपमा पनि उहाँले अनुभव बटुलिसक्नु भएको छ। सन् 1975 देखि 58 मा क्याम्ब्रिज विश्वविद्यालयबाट मानव शास्त्र र सन् 2013 मा लन्डन स्कुल अफ इकोनोमिक्सबाट अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय रणनीति तथा कूटनीति जस्ता महत्त्वपूर्ण विषयहरूमा शिक्षा हासिल गर्नुभएको छ। उहाँले नेपालमा सन् 1979 देखि 81 र 1984 देखि 1991-92 गरी गुरुङहरूमा काम गर्नुभएको छ, अध्ययन अनुसन्धान गर्नुभएको छ। त्यसै गरी 1983 देखि 84 मा मलेसियाको सारावाकस र सन् 1998 देखि 99 मा भारतमा काम गर्नुभएको छ। उहाँको विद्यावारिधीको शोध पत्रको शीर्षक छ विश्वासहरू, अभ्यासहरू र किम्बदन्तीहरू भन्ने, जुन उहाँले गुरुङहरूको स्यामनिज्म झाँक्रीवादमा आधारित छ। सन् 1983 मा क्याम्ब्रिजबाट यो उहाँको प्रकाशित छ। स्यामनिज्म र अन्य मौखिक परम्पराको सांस्कृतिक तथा भाषिक चरित्रहरूबारे उहाँका अनुसन्धान अन्तर्गत सिक्लिसवाद क्षेत्रबाट पेता लुताको उतार तथा उल्था गर्ने काम गर्नुभएको छ। यसलाई गुरुङको पेय अध्ययनका लागि सामग्रीहरू नामक ग्रन्थ हार्वर्ड ओरिएन्टल श्रृङ्खलाको रूपमा 2 खण्डमा सन् 2018 मा प्रकाशित भइसकेको छ। उहाँ र बेरुनिका टुफ्रेले संयुक्त रूपमा रूप र कार्य नेपाली हिमालयका 3 गुरुङ गाउँहरूमा पोषण, अनुकूलन तथा सामाजिक असमानता बारे एक अध्ययन नामक पुस्तक, जुन लन्डनको स्मिथ गोर्डन प्रकाशकले सन् 1997 मा प्रकाशित गरिसकेको छ, जसमा प्राध्यापक डाक्टर गणेशमान गुरुङ र स्टान उली जासचेकको पनि सहयोग रहेको छ। Now I would like to welcome Professor Simon Strickland by giving the floor. Age, you have 20 minutes for your presentation, and I will indicate the time when 3 minutes is left and finally when 1 minute is left to wrap up your talk. Over to you, Age.
Hello, namaste, Tajubani, Dilibani Haru, namaste. Nga lentai Nepal rapini unais panchanabe sa shariapini lai. Tatazi nasasa kaimu ani tamuki chenle apon. Tara su antarashtriya tamu guru parisadi pimiwa nimto yori bishi. Nga ngini sai toimu. Tara nga tamuki ponwa mongi ponwa banda kiwa di angreji komu. Tatazi tere nga angreji poneshido ai. So I'm going to speak about the Tamu Beda Luda. And if I can have the first slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I studied with 2 very wise and very knowledgeable men in Sikhistan, Padan Singh on the left side and Jipodu Bahadur, Bajia Cleori Bahadur on the right-hand side. And these 2 very kind, very knowledgeable and very thoughtful men taught me almost everything I know about the Tamu Bedaluda or Pe. So I will say a little bit about the past as we can interpret it from the Bay, which I recorded in 1980 and thereabouts. So the first thing I would say is the historical characteristics of the pay are very interesting indeed. There are characteristics of the history to do with migration, as we see in the Protocol pay, about the pattern of farming with animals moving up into the highlands in the summer and down into the lowlands in winter. For example, the Maipe, and the use of yaks, for example, as well as cows and sheep in the Maipe. The practices of slash and burn farming of millet, in particular, in Kusimape, and of course, hunting of deer, playing a very important role in all the pay, or any of the pay, in the Qatar, for example, and also in the Maipe. And then, of course, the salt trade in salt for grain and other goods across the mountains, illustrated in the and in some respects, of course, consequences of these different patterns of economy or social inequality in the population, as we see in Boasene province about the rich man and the poor man, and in other pay as well. In particular, Abi Kalaporani, Ananalanali, for example. These are two interesting pay in relation to the characteristics of social inequality. There is also biological relevance. The interesting studies recently by Gurungs and category on Col Sombre, the site from 6 towns, you look southeastwards down the valley, have been found through archaeological studies to date perhaps to around 800 years or so ago, and perhaps longer. And Kosovo is a site to which there is reference in several days, including in the Podjukorite day. Another interesting historical perspective is the name used for the population. So in none of the 16,000 shloka or so, which I was able to record with Padam Singh, was any reference to the name or the name Gurung. Where did I get to, Anita?
Yes, Simon Age, you can move ahead.
So, okay. So then, the page shows a number of interesting motifs. These are stories, if you like, which we find in different forms across the region. For example, Mama is a story about a man who went to marry a fish. So he would have an animal bride. There are other stories like the Karada, which are about a man who travels away from his wife and then returns with the help of an animal. And this is a story which we find in some ways in the story of the Aranyakaparva in the Mahabharata, but also in Homeric epic in ancient Europe. And there are other motifs we find if we look at comparable material across the regions of Asia and Europe. The other important characteristic of the Pe is the very special language, the language of Songkwi. It's a poetic language with a lot of very beautiful forms of words and relationship to music, drums, but also bells, and the singing style that the Clowry can sometimes use. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I want to play one from the Pedaluda. Sanimulanengi Podorin Madi Yugardi Pi Sazaklaze Timaipe. And I've taken 8 lines, 8 shloka, so to speak, from it. And if, please, you could activate the sound on this slide. Okay, so thank you. I mentioned this example for 2 reasons. One is that it shows in the first 3 lines, 4 lines, some characteristic repetition in the language. So you have and you have the use of the verb form yamaga as a characteristic difference between the verb forms of the Pe and the verb forms of the vernacular, which would normally be something like yadi or yai. And the second reason for showing this example is the difference in the speed, if you like, of recitation between the first 4 lines and the second 3 lines. And that change in tempo or change in speed is interesting. It reflects, if you like, the sudden emergence of the sun and the moon back in lighting the earth. The sea, of course, is where a bird went to retrieve, bring back the moon and sun, which have been, so to speak, killed. And when the sun and moon are brought back, the whole place, so between the lines in this example, reflects that change, if you like, in the part of the story. Can I have the next slide, please? So then if we think about the Pe as I recorded them in around 1980, there are some important characteristics to note. I think the first is the diversity. In other words, the fact that between different villages and between different Poju and Tleuri, there are differences in the detail of the Pe and in the types of, or the properties of the language used in reporting them. A lot more could be done to record the diversity in Pe between different village traditions and between different groups of Pojumai and Tleuri. But having said that, there is also evidence for considerable reliability across performances. I recorded performances by Padam Singh, for example, around 12 months apart, and found around 99% of the detail of these performances was replicated. And that's an impressive degree of consistency. And also, I think, consistency in some of the central important acts of the Pedaluda. I'm thinking of the Plawiwa, the Tawawa in the Puelava, and other elements in ritual performance, which are very important in the life crises of people in these villages. Another point I would make is the relevance of the content of Pe to the places in which the population live and the geography of the area. And I'll say a bit more about that shortly. And next is the importance of references to specific members of families and the social context in which the Pe are recited. So the individual hosts or beneficiaries of a performance would be named, usually in parts of the recitations that we're talking about. And a point that I mentioned earlier about the enormous quantity of material. Padam Singh allowed me to record around 13,000 shlokas, or 13,000 lines of Bedaluda. That is a very large quantity. And for comparison, one might say it was around 2/3 the length of the Iliad, just in terms of lines, although the nature of the lines would be very different between these two traditions. And another point, though, is the creativity that one can find in the performances of Bhai. We've seen some of that perhaps in recently published work by our friend Yarjung Tamu. And I think there is clearly a dynamic to the tradition of Bhai, which is an important, lively quality of this tradition. But then on the other hand, perhaps evidence of vulnerability, where the practice of employing Poju or Tlaurimai to do things is changing, and where some expertise may be lost. Can I have the next slide, please? So in this slide, I wanted to illustrate places in the area inhabited mainly by the Gurung population. As you can see, it's the southern slopes of the Annapurna and the Lamjung Himal. And what I've chosen to use as my example is the narrative describing the journey made by Karabaran as he searches for wild honey with his 9 sons. And this is the story from the Pe Karda. It's a very important Pe in the tradition. And my understanding is that Karabaran can sometimes be understood to be Mahadev. So it's a very important narrative. And the red line you can see on this slide, starting with a yellow arrow, shows the route taken by Karabaran and his 9 sons as they travel through the Gurung countryside, pointing out different places where wild honey can be found. And in each place, he says, here you can find wild honey. Next slide, please. Where is Gorkha? Gorkha is to the east of that area. So in this slide, I've taken 5 lines or 7 lines, I think, from the Karda. And you can see in the photographs, which I took in the valley between Siklis and Kilang villages, the kind of wild honey collecting practice that we're talking about in this Pe. So could you please play the sound on this slide? So this example also illustrates again the special characteristics of Tsongkui. The use, for example, of a series of numbers, Dineng, Ine, Soneng, Ane, Kunen, Neda, Nedamaga, to describe a process of, on the one hand, climbing down the ladder on the cliff to find honey, and Tiringiri, Soringari, Kuri, to describe the process of cutting away at the honeycomb. Can you show the next slide? Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So in this second map, next slide, please. In this second map, I wanted to show again from the Karda the places. That's right, thank you. The places to which Karabaran sends his 9 sons after he's come back to his wife. And he sends them on a route starting with the yellow arrow in Muktinaf, running down through Nyashang, Yazumdo, down the Masyangdi-Kola Valley, and then across through Gurung country to the west, and then back to Siklis. And it's an interesting route because in each of the places he visits, he tells one of the 9 sons to go to stay with the Shinamru or the Yamaraj of that locality. And when he gets back to Siklis, he tells his youngest son to stay at the hearth place in the home. And then he says to his 7 daughters to stay in the doorway of the home. A very interesting example of how the places in the area are used to support the narrative of the story in this case. If I can go on to the next slide, please, which is my last slide. This is really looking to the future on the basis of the material I've summarized for you today. Of course, there is work being done to record, to transcribe, and to translate, and a lot of the work being done by the Tamu Peluzang has been very important in establishing the evidence base on and ensuring that this very important material is maintained for the future. But of course, in practical terms, Ojumai, to a degree, compete with other sources of help in relation to health challenges, for example, in the community. And yet the traditions which we're talking about, the Pedaluda, are an important part of Tamu identity, an important part of Tamu heritage. And there is clearly more that we can do, not only to preserve this type of tradition, but also to understand it as a form of Janajati, Bhasa, Dharma, Sanskriti. So ladies and gentlemen, that brings my presentation to a close. Thank you very much indeed. It's an honor to be able to speak at this event. Thank you very much.
Aleli Orse, Gyasaje Simonage. Thank you so much, Professor Strickland, for your insightful deliberations. We believe Gurung community is grateful for your contribution for making Tamupi more accessible for the Gurungs and any interested researchers in general that would help understand and preserve Gurung language, religion, and culture. Now, let me switch to Nepali to share a summary of your presentation in short. मानवशास्त्रीहरूले कसरी र किन मानव समाजहरू स्थान विशेष र समयको अन्तरालमा विविधता आउँछ भन्ने बारे बुझ्ने लक्ष्य राख्छन्। प्रोफेसर स्टिक्लिस क्षेत्रका तमुहरू र तमु समाजमा शोध गर्दा 140 वटा पेतालुता वा पेहरू पत्ता लगाउनु भयो र ती पेका श्लोकहरूको संख्या 1300 जति रहेको उहाँले बताउनु भयो र जुन श्लोकहरू हामीलाई उहाँले उदाहरण सहित सुनाउनु भयो र जहाँ हाम्रो पुर्खाहरूको बसाइ सरायको जसरी उहाँहरू हिँड्नु भयो त्यो बाटो पनि उहाँले म्यापमा देखाउनु भयो। उहाँको अनुसार पे निकै प्राचीन प्रकृतिका भएका र निकै विविध खाले हुँदै पनि लामो समयदेखि निरन्तर रूपमा उही प्रक्रिया रहेको देखिन्छ। उहाँले भविष्यमा गुरुङका पेका बारेमा अध्ययन अनुसन्धानका लागि ती पेतालुताहरू रेकर्ड गरिएको र ती सबैलाई उतार तथा अनुवाद गरिएको छ जुन आफैमा माफ गर्नुहोला गुरुङ सम्पदाको महत्त्वपूर्ण अंश हो। मलाई स्पटलाइटमा ल्याइदिनु भयो हुन्थ्यो प्राविधिक साथीहरू। यसबाट हामी के बुझ्न सक्छौं भने उहाँको यो दस्तावेज तमु गुरुङ भाषा, धर्म र संस्कृति बारे बुझ्न र संरक्षण गर्नका लागि अति महत्त्वपूर्ण र उपयोगी सामग्री हुनेछ। Thank you so much, Professor Strickland, once again for your valuable contribution to the Tamu community and giving your valuable time for this international Tamu dialogue. We can imagine that how much are you dedicated and passionate towards our Tamu community. Thank you once again. यसैगरी म आजका हाम्रा अर्का वक्ता बेलायतका प्रोफेसर आलन माकफार्लन ज्यूलाई प्रस्तुतिका लागि अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु। उहाँलाई फ्लोर दिनुभन्दा अगाडि उहाँको छोटो परिचयका लागि म फेरि रोम जीलाई अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु स्लाइड प्रेजेन्टेसन। सन् 1941 मा भारतको सिलोङ आसाममा जन्मनुभएका प्राध्यापक आलन मैकफार्लन बेलायतको ड्रागन स्कुल, सेड पेरग स्कुल, अक्सफोर्ड विश्वविद्यालय तथा लन्डन विश्वविद्यालयबाट उहाँले शिक्षा हासिल गर्नुभएको छ। उहाँले 2वटा स्नातकोत्तर तथा 2वटा विद्यावारिधि हासिल गर्नुभएको छ। उहाँले अक्सफोर्ड विश्वविद्यालयबाट इतिहासमा र लन्डन विश्वविद्यालयबाट मानव शास्त्रमा विद्यावारिधि गर्नुभएको हो। मानव शास्त्रमा विद्यावारिधि गर्न उहाँ सन् 1968 देखि 70 सम्म नेपालको कास्कीको थाक गुरुङ गाउँमा 15 महिना बिताउनु भएको थियो। उहाँ लगातार गुरुङका बारेमा सबैभन्दा लामो समयसम्म 50 वर्ष त उहाँले मनाइसक्नु भयो। नेपाल आएको 50 वर्षसम्म अनुसन्धान गरिरहनु हुने अध्ययनकर्तामा पर्नुहुन्छ र उहाँको श्रीमती सारा ह्यारिसनले 50 वर्षमा 19 पटक नेपाल भ्रमण गरिसक्नु भएको छ। उहाँको मानव शास्त्रमा विद्यावारिधिको स्रोतहरू र जनसङ्ख्या नेपालका गुरुङहरूका बारेमा एक अध्ययन रहेको छ। सन् 1978 मा प्रकाशित इंग्लिश व्यक्तिवादको उत्पत्ति, सन् 2005 मा प्रकाशित लिलीहरूलाई पत्र संसार कसरी चल्छ, लेटर्स टु लिली हाउ द वर्ल्ड वर्क्स, जुन मैले र डाक्टर टेकले नेपालीमा पनि अनुवाद गरेका छौं केही अंशहरू र त्यो अर्को भाग अनुवाद गर्ने क्रममा छ। जस्ता 40 भन्दा बढी पुस्तकहरू लेखिसक्नु भएको छ भने उहाँको लेखाइ अझ जारी छ, जुन इंग्ल्यान्ड, नेपाल, जापान र चीन उहाँको अनुसन्धानका क्षेत्रहरू हुन्। सन् 1986 देखि उहाँ बेलायती प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठानको प्राज्ञको रूपमा चयन हुनुभई कार्यरत हुनुहुन्छ भने क्याम्ब्रिज विश्वविद्यालयको सन् 2009 मा सेवानिवृत्त पश्चात प्रोफेसर एमेरिटस तथा सोही विश्वविद्यालयको किङ्स कलेजको आजीवन सदस्य पनि हुनुहुन्छ। Now I would like to welcome our Agi, giving this floor. Like other speakers, you also have 20 minutes for your presentation. Agi, I'll indicate the time when 3 minutes and 1 minute is left to wrap up your talk. Over to you, Agi. The floor is yours.
Namaste. Beli ki beli saban mua. Nga saban mu, nga kibtai, nga miamro, nga naati. Sale nga tinaga saban mu. Neve nga presyo sera debi saban mu. Nga tan kilai namaste bid o. Nga tume, nga istamitra jaga. Tan namaste. Colonel Cross, Shana, Tan Tume, Lai, Namaste Bid. Lai nga toko, Toson, nga Nasa, nga Toson Nasa Tiba, nga Ayaimu, Sale nga Tomigi Shemliai, Sale Gara Madido, nga Belaideve Kui Ponle O. Also, some of you don't speak Gurung, so it'll be easier if I speak in English. So it is a great honor and privilege, and I would like to particularly thank Tech and Anita Gurung for all their support in this. It's a great honor to be here talking to you, and completely amazing. If you had said to me 52 years ago, when I first went to the Gurungs, that I would be able to sit in my study here and talk to Gurungs all over the world by some device, I would have said you were completely mad. So what has happened is extraordinary, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to now talk to you all, and thank you for listening. I'm now going to give a small presentation, if it works. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is about what the Gurungs mean to me, and therefore it is very quick, 20 minutes, but at the end I will give you some links so that you can see other things if you want to. This is, I am just giving you a fishing rod with which you can catch many, many, many other fish if you want to. So I come from Cambridge. This is my college in Cambridge, the most famous college perhaps in the world, King's College. And I show this, my room is down here, and I show this to show the contrast between the world I come from in the UK and what I went to over 50 years ago when I went to Tak. So most of you will know, of course, where the Gurungs are, and this is where Tak is. And when we arrived in 1968, Kathmandu was just a small town, much smaller than Pokhara is now. This is Swayambhanut, and you see no houses down below. It's not like that now, nor is Pokhara. This is just beside Mahendra Pool. And you know what it's like now in Pokhara, many of you. And this is what Pokhara was like then. There were only 5 taxis and about 4 hotels in the whole of Pokhara. And this is lakeside. Imagine if I had seen what was going to happen and bought the land here, I would now be a millionaire. This is my wife sitting beside the lake. So we set off up the Siklis Valley to the village of Tak. And Tak is right up here on the slope here, and you see how steep it was. I never expected it to be like that. And you can see the steepness if you look at the gradient of the steepest mountain in England, Scafell Pike, and then you look at the slope up from the river to Tak village, and it's steeper than anything in the steepest mountain in England. So it's pretty extraordinary that the Gurungs should live here. This is the village of Tak when I first arrived with my wife Jill here, and this is the house where we lived. And you see a typical Gurung village, not much change now when we last went back 3 years ago. This is the house in which we lived. This was IB Saab's house, and his mother lived in the house next door. And we spent 15 months in Nepal living in this little house. The first shock really was eating, because as you see, all the children crowded round. We didn't speak any Gurung, and we weren't used to cooking on the floor and on wood and with smoke all around us. So it was a tremendous shock to everything I'd ever encountered before in terms of privacy and ways of living. But we survived. And one of the most useful things I had taken was my guitar. When I went back there 20 years later, I discovered that they were still singing the songs which we had sung in the evenings using this little guitar. What I was doing was a PhD, a doctorate in anthropology, on particularly economy and the growth of population. And the conditions for doing this were not easy. This table, for example, took 4 months before I could get a table made in this village. And I sat upstairs here in the smoke, writing notes for my thesis. Now, anthropology is basically about living with the people and both participating, living as they live, and also observing what they are doing and observing yourself. And I particularly like this photograph because it shows my wife, Sarah, who came with me on my second trip in 1986. And she has got one of our friends teaching her how to weave. And you see the closeness, you see the involvement. All the barriers have gone. And here is one woman teaching another woman how to weave. What particularly struck me about the Gurungs, I wasn't studying religion, was, however, the amazing ritual and religious system. For example, this is the little book which Indra Bahadur and I wrote about a guide to the Gurungs. And on the cover is the Gato Sheva dance. This dance has died out in Tak by the time I went again, and it's died out in many Gurung villages, but fortunately I've got quite a lot of films of it, which are on the internet. So the Gato was amazing. Even more amazing, when I later went back and understood it, was the dance which very few of you will have ever seen, called the Kusun Teba. And this is a wild dance done in the evening. This girl is in trance. This is in Yanjakot village. And this girl is in trance, and she's got a stick here. And if anyone says the word buffalo, she goes mad and beats everyone. So I'm not able to play the music for that because it might have a very disturbing effect on certain members of the audience. The most interesting thing, which Simon has very usefully described to you, are the rituals and myths, the Peda Luda. And here on my first visit, I am with the shamans watching a ritual. They are extraordinary. This is the famous one, the Moshi Tiba, after an unfortunate death. And I show you this just for a glimpse of something amazing, which I still can't understand. Here is Yajung Gurung doing the ritual. This is slide number 20. Slide number 21, which I showed to him, is this, a second later. And there's Yajung, and there is his god protecting him. There are ancestors coming to help him. And here are evil spirits, witches attacking him. This is what he told me. He said, this is what I see when I go into shamanic trance, but I never expected it to come out on a photograph. So amazing. You are in another world. I want to talk about the main thing about my work with the Gurungs, which is how I became involved with individual Gurungs as friends and family. One of my closest friends was Prem Bahadur Gurung here, who was a bit younger than me. So he was like a younger brother, and we spent a huge amount of time together, as brothers do. And then when I went back 30 years later, there he had come back from working in Kathmandu, and we renewed our friendship. His father, Ujay Singh Gurung, was a very learned Poju or shaman. Here he is with all his equipment. And from him, towards the end, I gathered many of the rituals and myths that Simon was talking about and just made very amateur notes on them. But I haven't yet done anything with all that valuable material. Another important helper was Brikaras Gurung, who helped me translate all the ancient financial documents, the land documents of the village. Without him, I couldn't have done that. Two little boys particularly had helped me. They were about 13 when I first went there. One of them was Komal Bahadur Gurung. And so I visited him in Bombay, where he was working. And then when he came back to Tak, here he is with me on a wonderful reunion. The most important contact, though, on my first visit was with Lieutenant Bowen Singh Gurung here. He had been in the British Gurkhas, and he was an enormous support and help to me on my first visit. And his son here tragically died 2 or 3 years after this. And so I became adopted as his son, his older son. This was his younger son. So I became a member of this Gurung family in a way which was impossible in England. And in particular, my sisters here, and in particular, this sister, Dilmaya Gurung, featured importantly throughout the rest of my life. It had not been easy working there, but when my wife and I came to leave, it was the most difficult, almost the most difficult day in my life. I felt terribly sad. I was moving away from a total world which had given me great kindness and involvement. And here the villagers are saying goodbye as we walk out of the village, and I felt completely empty and lost, but fortunately was able to go back again. When I came back to England, I wrote up my PhD and then wrote my book on the Gurungs like this. And I continued to work on the Gurungs through the years, including with Sarah, my wife, translating Pinier's book and publishing it. We went back in 1986 and a couple of years later built a little house in the village, which is still there, in which we stayed in the courtyard of Dilmaya Gurung. And here occasionally I wore Gurung dress with my friends. The most important person with whom I started to work very closely 3 years after I went back was Dilmaya Gurung. And here she is. She was my younger sister, so I called her Bhai, and she called me Agi. And I became closer to her than almost anyone in my life. She was an amazing woman. And also to her daughter, Prem Kumari here, who I started to film her and her relationship to her mother when Prem Kumari was about this age, about 2. Prem Kumari was growing up and she was a great assistant too. She's teaching Sarah here how to speak Gurung. And I became so close to her mother that when I asked her once whether she would wash my hair, because this would be absolutely impossible in 90% of human societies to ask a woman in another culture to wash your hair. But this shows the equality and confidence of Gurung women, that she was prepared and even to laugh about the fact that I didn't seem to have very much hair to wash. And the closeness was shown in 1994 when we were there for the Bhai Tika, where, as you know, the women, a sister feeds her brother. And this is a very intimate gesture. And here Dilmaya is feeding me. So when she died the year later, I was more affected and upset by it than by any death in my life up to that time, including my father. This is the funeral ritual, the Pue Lava, for Dilmaya. And we were brothers and sisters, and so close. As some of you may know, the dead spirit goes into a sheep, and you comb the sheep with the Dilmaya's comb, which is what Sarah is doing here. So this was a real brother-sister relationship. And a couple of years later, her family put up this little memorial, and later put a much better and bigger one up on the road to the forest. Other Gurungs were enormously helpful. Badra Singh Gurung here, who knew the whole village, every house, every kinship relationship, every buffalo, everything. And he spent hours and hours telling us the inside history of the village. Another enormously important person was Indra Bahadur Gurung, who was my uncle and with whom I wrote that book, and who worked on many projects with us. Another non-Gurung friend over the years was Colonel John Cross, who is in his mid-90s now and still writing several books a year, one of the most incredible people I've met and one of the greatest linguists in Asia. From very early on, I was filming. This was my first camera, and then with better cameras. And this has produced, I think, probably one of the best film archives of any society in the world. This is a tiny part of the films in the first visit. And since then, I've been to Tak another 19 times. And so I've got 50-year record in film of a mountain community, many hundreds of hours of film, in fact. And they are up on YouTube. If you go to the Ayabaya column thing on YouTube, I'll give you the references at the end. and you will find all the films there, and you can watch them. And they're watched by hundreds of thousands, including many Gurungs around the world. And also, if you want to get them downloaded, you can find them on the streaming media service. Again, I'll give you the reference at Cambridge, and there you can download them very easily and watch them in your own time. Indra Bahadur and I held a meeting of shamans, Poju and Claybury, and we suggested that they set up some institutions to save Gurung culture. And then IB designed this design for what is the Koimbo in Pokhara. I hope many of you have visited it, which has been copied to other parts of Nepal. And his work particularly, and some money I managed to raise as well, were behind the Tamu Pie Lusang. So this is one way in which I've tried to give something back for all the kindness and generosity of my Gurung hosts. Other younger Gurungs with whom I've worked, this is Shana or Bikash Gurung, who is Dilmaya's younger son. And ever since I first met him when he was just about 2 years old, we have been very close friends. And he works with us on various projects in Nepal and is our assistant. And he runs a trekking company, which I hope some of you will use, called Dilmaya Treks and Tours, which will take you up to Tak and other places with one of my chief friends in the village. If you want to learn about the Gurungs, there's no better way than going with Bikash Gurung. So on my website, www.alanmacfarlane.com, under projects and under publications, you'll find lots more of my work on the Gurungs. When I retired in 2009, one of the first things we did was to go back to Nepal. And here Sarah and I are on our return to the village. As you see, you can see how well we are and how happy we are to be back. And it has been a life-changing event being involved with the Gurungs. So if you want to learn more about our work and how we are trying to preserve Gurung culture through films and through writings and through other things like that, you can look at YouTube. If you search for Ayabaya Gurungs or go to that, you can take a photograph of this, or you can go to the streaming media service in Cambridge, and a lot of Gurungs, hundreds of Gurung films are there. You can find other things on my website or go to those addresses. So to stop there. So I haven't been told it's 3 minutes to go, but I'm sure it must be 3 minutes to go. So thank you.
On time, Age. Thank you so much.
So Chanle Yad O Gilai Amlid O. Namaste. Dhanyabad.
Thank you very much, Lele Gasaji Orse, Professor Alan Macfarlane, for your thoughtful and moving presentation about how you view Gurungs and they mean to you. Your continuous love and dedication to our community for the last 5 decades is simply amazing and unbeatable. Thank you so much. Like for other speakers, now let me switch to Nepali to share summary of your presentation in short. यहाँले सुनिहाल्नुभयो प्रोफेसर आलन माकफार्लनले एकदमै राम्रोसँग तमु कुएमा उहाँले आफ्नो परिवारको परिचय दिनुभयो र यहाँहरूले बुझ्नु भयो पनि कति राम्रोसँग र उहाँको प्रस्तुतिमा उहाँले द गुरुङ्स एन्ड व्हाट डु दे मीन टु मी, गुरुङहरू र मेरो जीवनमा उनीहरूको के महत्त्व छ शीर्षकमा नै केन्द्रित रहेर उहाँले प्रस्तुति दिनुभयो। र सबैभन्दा एकदमै अत्यन्त महत्त्वपूर्ण कुरा, उहाँले 52 वर्ष अगाडिका दुर्लभ तस्बिरहरू नेपालको काठमाडौँको थाकको पोखराको र उहाँको आफ्नो परिवार र उहाँलाई आफ्नो अध्ययन र अनुसन्धानमा सहयोग गर्ने सबै मित्रहरूको फोटो पनि हामीलाई उहाँले शेयर गर्नुभयो। यसैले नै यो हेर्दा नै हामीलाई थाहा हुन्छ कि उहाँ कति मात्र चाहिँ तमु सोसाइटी र तमुहरूसँग अट्याच्ड हुनुहुन्छ, हामीसँग आत्मीय हुनुहुन्छ। र उहाँले सुरुमै चाहिँ एउटा थाकको जुन हिमाल देखाएर उहाँले कति उक्लदा कति गाह्रो भयो भन्ने कुरा पनि सेयर गर्नुभयो, जुन चाहिँ युकेमा त्यो एकदमै अग्लो माउन्टेन भन्दा पनि अग्लो छ भनेर भन्नुभयो। र उहाँले 15 महिनासम्म अनुसन्धान गरेर आफ्नो पिएचडी गर्नुभएको कुरा पनि हामीले एकदमै राम्रोसँग बुझ्ने मौका पायौँ। र त्यो 15 महिनाको दौरानमा उहाँले आफूले बस्ने एउटा कुर्सी र टेबल बनाउनलाई पनि 4 महिना लागेको, त्यति बेला त्यो समय कस्तो सकसपूर्ण थियो र त्यो समयमा पनि उहाँले यसरी गुरुङ गाउँमा बसेर आफ्नो अध्ययन अनुसन्धान गर्नुभयो भन्ने कुरा हामीलाई एकदमै राम्रोसँग बुझाइदिनु भयो। सुरुका महिनाहरूमा कसरी समाजमा मिल्ने र सिक्ने भन्ने कुरामा उहाँले एकदमै त्यो जानकारी र गुरुङ समाजले कसरी उहाँलाई चाहिँ एकदमै सहयोग गर्यो भन्ने कुराहरू बताउनु भयो। र त्यसपछि उहाँ एकदमै आत्मीय र एकदम रूपमा सहभागी हुनुभयो र त्यसलाई उहाँले चाहिँ एकदमै महत्त्वपूर्ण हुँदो रहेछ यो चाहिँ मित्रता, हैन, एउटा परिवार जस्तो भएर बस्नलाई भन्ने बारे पनि वर्णन गर्नुभयो। र उहाँले सेयर गर्नुभएको तस्बिरहरूमा जो दिलमाया उहाँले आफ्नो बहिनी बनाउनु भएको छ र उहाँको धर्म बहिनी र उहाँको परिवारसँग र त्यति बेलाका चाडपर्वमा उहाँहरूले भाग लिनु भएको र उहाँको मृत्यु हुँदा भइसकेपछि नि उहाँको पयमा उहाँ बेलायतबाट आएर त्यो पयमा सहभागी भएको कुरा पनि उहाँले हामीलाई सेयर गर्नुभयो, जुन कुरा हामीले देख्ने मौका पायौँ। र अरू कुरा पनि उहाँका आफ्ना बहिनीका परिवारहरू साथै त्यस क्षेत्रमा विविध खाले सहयोगहरू प्रदान गर्दै आउनु भएको पनि उहाँले हामीलाई जानकारी दिनुभयो। र अर्को एउटा महत्त्वपूर्ण कुरा, नेपालमा सबैभन्दा लामो समयसम्म अटुट सम्बन्ध र लगातार अध्ययन गर्नुहुने विदेशी विद्वान हुनुहुन्छ उहाँका अन्य धेरै मित्रहरू लाई पनि उहाँले नाम लिनुभयो। लेफ्टेनेन्ट भुवन सिंह, कर्णेल जेपी क्रस, जो धेरै लामो समयपछि बेलायती मूलका नेपाली नागरिक बन्नु भएको छ, र आइबी गुरुङको उहाँले नाम लिनुभयो। र उहाँलाई सहयोग गर्ने गैर तमुको पनि उहाँले नाम लिनुभयो। र उहाँले यो गुरुङहरूका लागि के फिर्ता गर्न सके त अथवा के भयो त भन्ने कुरामा चाहिँ मुख्य गरेर उहाँले 50 वर्षदेखि विविध खाले तमु समाजसँग सम्बन्धित भिडियोहरू, किताब तथा रचनाहरू र पोखरा स्थित वैभव निर्माणमा उहाँको सहयोग र थुप्रै युवाहरूसँग पनि उहाँले सहकार्य गर्नुभएको कुरा पनि उल्लेख गर्नुभयो। र अन्तमा उहाँले यी सबका बारेमा वेबसाइट र लिङ्कहरूलाई पनि हामी माझ उहाँले सेयर गर्नुभयो र जहाँ उहाँले खिचेका भिडियोहरू, उहाँका लेखहरू, रचनाहरू सबै समावेश भएका छन्, जुनलाई हामीले त्यसमा चाहिँ ब्राउज गरेर हेर्न सक्छौँ। र हामी आशा गर्छौँ हाम्रो युवा पुस्ताले ती सबै स्रोतहरूलाई हामी तमुहरूको संस्कार र संस्कृति संरक्षणका लागि उपयोगमा ल्याउनुहुनेछ भनेर हामी यो आशा गर्न सक्छौँ। Once again, thank you very much our respected speakers, Nanako, Yoshimoto, Professor Simon Strickland and Professor Alan Macfarlane for accepting our invitation to deliver your valuable presentations in this forum. We are very grateful to you all. अब म यहाँहरु सबैमा धन्यवाद ज्ञापन गरिदिनु हुन कतार तमु सोसाइटीका अध्यक्ष श्री भाइ काजी गुरुङज्यूलाई हार्दिक अनुरोध गर्दछु। भाइ काजी गुरुङज्यू।
धन्यवाद अनिता जी। First of all, my name is Bhai Kaji Gurung. I am president of Tamu Samaj Qatar. सुनिराख्नु भएको छ?
हजुर, हामीले एकदम सुनेका छौं।
Respected chairman of the ITC Council and president of Tamu Yul Sosdi Gurung National Council Resam Gurung, honorable chairman of today's important session and challenge of Gandaki University, Professor Dr. Ganesh Gurung. In the eye of foreign guest, we have to keep our important saying about Gurung have been very close to the community and have studied our thoroughly. Reverend Miss Nanako, Yoshimoto, Professor System Japan, Professor Simon Strickland from UK, Professor Ilan from UK, respected media person Anita Gurung also may who are directly associated with this program, also on behalf on the sponsor Tamu Gurung Society Qatar, greetings to all. सर्वप्रथम त मेरो नाम भाइ काजी गुरुङ, म तमु समाज कतारको अध्यक्ष र यस 2020 अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तमु गुरुङ परिषदको यो यस भेलाले जुन मलाई धन्यवादको मन्तव्य दिनको लागि एउटा मौका दिनुभयो। यसकारण यहाँ यस सोसाइटी यस काउन्सिल लगायत सम्पूर्ण टिमलाई हार्दिक धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। तमु जातिको सांस्कृतिक रूपमा धनी छ। हाम्रो पहिचान संस्कार, संस्कृति, परम्परा, भाषा, वेशभूषा छन् जसले हामीलाई युगौं युगदेखि जीवन्त राखेको छ। यिनीहरू हाम्रा अमूल्य सम्पत्तिहरू हुन्। राज्यको एक भाषा, एक धर्म र एक भूषा जस्तो विभेदकारी कारण सधैँ देश विदेशमा बसाइसराईको क्रममा बढेको कारणले गर्दा हाम्रो पहिचान क्रमिक रूपमा ह्रास आएको हो कि भन्ने लागेको छ, जुन चिन्ताको विषय बनेको छ। यद्यपि विश्वभर छरिएर रहेका तमुहरूले आफ्नो पहिचान जन्य सम्पत्ति संरक्षण, सम्वर्धन, प्रबन्ध र विकासको लागि संगठित रूपमा विभिन्न सङ्घ संस्थाहरूमा स्थापना गरेर अगाडि बढिरहेको जुन सकारात्मक र सुखको रूपमा लिनुपर्दछ। हाम्रो पहिचान जन्य सम्पत्ति जोगाउन आफ्नो तर्फबाट क्रियाशील तमु सङ्घ संस्थाहरूलाई आजको कार्यक्रमले थप प्रेरणा र ऊर्जा दिएको महसुस गरेको छु। तमु समुदायको बारेमा चासो राखेर यस सेसनको वक्ताहरूले जुन ढङ्गले अध्ययन गर्नुभएको छ, उहाँको अध्ययनबाट निस्केको निचोडलाई सम्मान गर्दै भोलिको दिनमा हामी र हाम्रा सन्ततिहरूको लागि महत्त्वपूर्ण अध्ययन सामग्री हुन सक्ने निश्चित छ। हाम्रा विदेशी पाहुनाहरूले हाम्रो देश, हाम्रो समुदायको बारेमा आफ्नो शोधपत्र मार्फत प्रचार प्रसार मात्र नभएर एउटा महत्त्वपूर्ण सम्पत्ति दिनुभएको छ। आफ्नो अध्ययनको क्रममा आएका विषयहरूलाई हामीमाझ शेयर गर्नु भएकोमा आयोजकको तर्फबाट तीनैजना आदरणीय वक्ताहरूलाई हार्दिक आभार सहित धन्यवाद व्यक्त गर्न चाहन्छु। मलाई लाग्छ आजको कार्यक्रमले विश्वभर स्थापना भएका तमुहरूको सङ्घ संस्थालाई जिम्मेवारी थप भएको महसुस गरेको छु। अन्त्यमा अहिलेको विषम परिस्थितिमा बीच भर्चुअल अनलाइनको माध्यमबाट विश्वभरिका तमुहरूलाई एकै ठाउँमा सहभागी गराएर एक आपसमा परिचित हुन र आफ्ना विचार गर्ने अवसर प्रदान को कार्य नेतृत्व गर्नुभएको परिषदका अध्यक्ष रेशम गुरुङज्यू सिंहको टिमलाई हार्दिक धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। र आजको यस कार्यक्रम अत्यन्त सफल र उपलब्धिमूलक रूपमा अगाडि बढिरहेको छ। कार्यक्रम पूर्ण सफल हुनेमा म विश्वस्त छु। Finally, I would like to thank Miss Nanako, Yoshimoto, Professor Strickland, Professor Alan Macfarlane for your valuable and grateful presentation. र बाँकी कार्यक्रम सफलतापूर्वक उपलब्धिमूलक बन्ने छ भन्ने मैले आशा लिएको छु भन्दै जुन मलाई यस धन्यवादको शुभकामनाको लागि समय दिनुभयो यहाँलाई म हार्दिक धन्यवाद दिँदै यस कार्यक्रम उपलब्धिमूलक बनोस् भन्ने शुभकामना व्यक्त गर्दै मेरो दुई शब्द यहाँ अन्त्य गर्न चाहन्छु। ग्यासजे जय तमु।
लेले ओर्सी ग्यासजे कतार तमु सोसाइटीका अध्यक्ष भाइ काजी गुरुङज्यूलाई यहाँ धेरैजनाले आजको हाम्रो यो प्रेजेन्टेसनको हाम्रो वक्ताहरूको बारेमा पनि धेरैजनाले लेख्नु भएको छ। आई जस्ट रिड सम अफ देम। छत्र गुरुङ युएसले लेख्नु भएको छ, प्राविधिक मित्रहरू प्लिज मलाई स्पटलाइटमा ल्याइदिनु होला। एक्सलेन्ट प्रेजेन्टेसन नानाको, भेरी क्लियर एन्ड अन्डरस्ट्यान्डेबल ट्रान्सलेसन अनिता बहिनी, आई स्याल्युट योर मल्टी ट्यालेन्ट भनेर भन्नुभएको छ। धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद। र यसै गरी जीत गुरुङज्यूले लेख्नु भएको छ, थ्याङ्क यू डाक्टर साइमन स्टिकल्यान्ड फर योर एक्सलेन्ट प्रेजेन्टेसन अन पेता लुता, इट इज वेल रिसिभ्ड भनेर भन्नुभएको छ। र यसै गरी दिस इज एन आई ओपनर टु मोस्ट अफ अस Thank you, Dr. Simon and Alan, for your excellent presentations. Thanks to Nanako for your presentation too. You could pass off a Gurung Chami with your attire. भन्नुभएको छ चित्र गुरुङजीले पनि त्यस्तै लेख्नु भएको छ. Thank you very much, Dr. Simon Strickland for Betaluta. It is very important for भन्नुभएको छ. These colors should be respected as Gurung Guru for our society. Really appreciate your great work. Bina Gurungले भन्नुभएको छ Dr. Alan Macfarlane, grateful to you and your amazing presentation. What a heart-touching presentation. Thank you so much for your awesome presentation, Dr. Alan.
दिदी अनम्युट गर्नु अन्त दिदी अनम्युट गर्नु.
यहाँहरु सबैजनालाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद. यो भन्दा अगाडि मैले पढेको सुन्नुभयो जी रुमजी?
बीचमा अलिकति लास्टको लगभग 10
त्यसो भए आदरणीय महानुभावहरु, आजको यो पहिलो सेसनमा हामीले विदेशी विद्वानहरुको नजरमा हामी तमु शीर्षक अन्तर्गत 3 जना विदेशी विद्वानहरु नानाको योशिमोतो, प्रोफेसर स्ट्रिकल्यान्ड र प्रोफेसर आलन माकफार्लेनका अत्यन्त महत्त्वपूर्ण विचारहरु यतिसम्म धैर्यताका साथ सुनिदिनु भएकोमा यहाँहरुलाई मुरी धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु र यस सहभागिताका लागि अब नम्र अनुरोध गर्दछु. साथै प्राविधिक टिमका प्रमुख श्री गुरुङज्यू, गंगादेवी गुरुङज्यू, रोम गुरुङज्यू, रुख गुरुङज्यू, रस गुरुङज्यू र पुकार गुरुङज्यूलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिँदै दोस्रो सत्रका सहजकर्ता सतिका गुरुङज्यू सहित सम्पूर्ण टिमलाई तयार अनुरोध गर्दै आजको यो सेसनका अध्यक्ष प्राध्यापक डाक्टर गणेशमान गुरुङज्यूलाई आफ्नो भनाइ सहित यो सेसनको अन्त्य गरिदिनु हुनका लागि हस्तान्तरण गर्दै म अहिलेलाई बिदा हुन्छु. दोस्रो हाम्रो फेरि भेट हुनेछ. ओर्से ग्यासाजे नमस्कार.
हेलो सबैलाई नमस्कार. म सुरु गरौँ?
हजुर डाक्टर साहब प्लिज.
Dear Chairperson Resham Babu and ladies and gentlemen and our guest speakers. First of all, I would like to thank NB Gurung from USA and Bhai Kaji Gurung for their presentation. I take this opportunity to thank our guest speakers, Professor Macfarlane Alan, Professor Simon Strickland, and Nanako Yoshimoto on this program organized by the International Tamu Council. We are really proud of you that we gave high priority to the Gurungs for your doctoral research. PhD गर्नलाई धेरै ठुलो महत्त्व दिनुभयो. Today I remember the other anthropologists, Donald Messerschmitt, Anders, and the people who are by heart attached with Gurung community. Gurung community is attached by the They are affiliated, they are associated with our Gurung community. 1991, I met Anders in Switzerland in a conference. It was so enjoyable when we did our community in Gurung language. Switzerland Gurung Basma I met Messerschmitt in Oslo in 1995, the capital city of the Norway, and we spoke in Tamu. Then it was miserable. I met Simon Strickland in 2018, who is my good friend, who is my best friend. After a long gap, but I missed to see Professor Alan during my time invitation as I was living for US. However, the new books written by Simon are very valuable as I have from Gurung Council. I met Professor Macfarlane Alan and his wife Sarah together with Simon. I passed 2 nights at Alan House. Alan House it was a beautiful cottage called Alan Kusumjanama. How is it Thosanasa these days? I don't know. How is Sickness in the Kilanasa? I don't know. But I love our Tamu respondents who help us in our field work, in our research. I appreciate their hospitality. सद्भावको म ज्यादै जाने एउटा जाने सद्भाव दिएर एकदम जाने प्रशंसा गर्दछु। आजको कुरो थियो दि टपिक अफ प्रेजेन्टेसन अन गुरुङ इन द आइज अफ फरेनर्स भनेर विदेशीहरूको आँखामा कस्तो नानाको Yoshimoto arigato gozaimasu. There are so many anthropologists in Japan, Professor Hiroshi, Professor Makito Minami, who are working about Nepal. Now, I have been to your university, Rico University, giving a lecture on Raksi. Pako baarema, Raksi ko baarema मैले त्यहाँ बोलेको छु. And your presentation on married women in natal home, very interesting case study of Nepal, and you are going to compare the comparative history of Nepal and Japan. The ritual process of the marriage in legitimacy is very, very interesting. And I agree with you that temporary visiting marriage practice is not common, not easily observable. I agree with you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate by heart. Simon, he started with a few words. Tamaki chalne apu. Tamaki chalne apu. He started with these words. I can't speak Gurung language clearly, but whenever I talk with him, he said, "Patmi athmi, did you have drink or not?" I'm kura garchu. And he is the excellent expert of Tataluta expert. Tataluta ko baarema koi expert cha bhane Simon Strickland मैले लिन्छु. His command over Gurung language is very commendable. साँच्चै नै राम्रो बोल्नुहुन्छ, साँच्चै नै राम्रो हुन्छ. तै पनि तमिकी छेनले आफू I can't speak Gurung language fluently भनेर उहाँले भन्नुभएको छ. Yes, maybe बेलायतमा प्र्याक्टिस नभएको होला, अहिले उहाँ ठुलो अफिसरमा हुनुहुन्छ. उहाँको जुन दुईटा पुस्तकहरू छन्, 2 volumes, त्यो मैले बुझाइसकेको छु हाम्रो उसमा. And I think Simon, that your guru was Kali Kopao. Kali sister was living in Pokhara, and few times I have been with you. So Kali Kopao is your guru teacher. So you are talking about an important part of the Tamu identity, Petaluta Mother. That's an 2 volumes जो उहाँले बुझाउनु भएको छ, recorded गरेर, translated गरेर, that I have given to the Gurung Council. Thank you very much, Simon, for your presentation. Then come to me, I got to Professor Macfarlane, Kosovo village. How did he start? Do you know? Savanmo. He started with his word. Savanmo, are you okay? Tamaki Tumli. I forgot the Gurung language, what he's saying there. Then Nape Ati. I can't listen well. Kati Ramro, so sweet words that he's using. He did his field work in Kosovo village, Kosovo Nasa. So I say that he's from Kosovo village. Then everyone knows him. But right today, I remember that he started a cooperative shop with the villagers, but it was not successful. Male lagani garera pani safal huna sakena. I remember that. Anthropologists generally, they do have participant observation that he did his anthropological field work in Kosovo village. So he got these so many materials like land documents. Land document मैले गाउँलेहरूबाट भाइहरूबाट पाएँ भने जो उहाँले बताउनु भएको छ साँच्चै नै हो. Then उहाँले जनि इन्द्रबहादुर दाइको कुरा ल्याउनु भयो, and he is talking about Koivu. He is explaining about Koivu. Koivu एउटा आइडेन्टिटीको रूपमा हामी लिन्छौँ. Then he is the expert in Gurung culture, Gurung society, and their economy. Thank you very much, Professor Macfarlane. Now, believe me, Simon, Professor Alan, Nanako, that your books, your research articles are extremely important and valuable and valuable and helpful to the preservation of the Gurung culture. Gurung संस्कृति बचाउनको लागि तपाईहरुको लेख सायदै महत्त्वपूर्ण छ कि रिसर्च ओरिएन्टेड Gurung lifestyle and ultimately Gurung identity. लेखहरु रिसर्च आर्टिकलहरु they are very helpful to preserve our culture, to preserve our Gurung identity. Today us they have time to see all. एकदम राम्रो शुभ दिन भयो. I appreciate your excellent expression. We know how you love Gurung, their language, their culture. Thanks a lot for your time part. जसरी आउनुलाई म धन्यवाद दिनुभयो साइमन फर योर भ्यालुएबल टाइम. तपाईँको समयको लागि मैले धेरै धेरै बट माई humble please stay safe from COVID-19. So you can be again next time as we are suffering from coronavirus in Nepal. So thank you for your excellent presentation. Thank you for your excellent presentation. Ajalamu, namaskar mo, Simon, Elan, Nanako, very arko seminary, Tamumai seminary, wow. Thank you very much. Namaste. My ethics,